Hey everyone, I made a big mistake. I lost the man I loved because of my selfish actions. I deeply regret hurting him, but what hurts even more is that he chose to leave instead of working through our problems. I wish he had stayed and helped me learn from my mistakes instead of walking away. I'm truly disappointed in the choices I made. I had a wonderful man in my life, a caring partner, and an amazing husband. I threw all of that away for some meaningless fling. When I was 19, I met my husband, who was 21, at a library. Before him, I had never been in a relationship or even been on a date. I was quite introverted, and my main focus in university was my education. I didn't want any distractions. He approached me at the library one day and complimented me, saying he had noticed me around and wanted to get to know me better. He asked for my phone number, but I turned him down right away. I didn't want to give out my number, and I certainly wasn't looking to get involved with anyone at school. I just wanted to focus on my studies and get my degree. Over the next few months, he would often come over to the table where I was studying with my friends. Sometimes he came alone, and other times he would join in conversations with my friends. I gradually got used to seeing him every day, watching him from afar as I studied and observing how well he got along with my friends. One day, he didn't show up at the library, and I became worried. I asked my friends if they had heard anything about his absence, but they claimed to know nothing. One of them even told me, "His life doesn't revolve around you, you know. Maybe he got tired of waiting for you and moved on." Those words stung, and at the time, I didn't fully understand why. It was only later that I realized I was falling for him, and the idea that he might have moved on hurt me deeply. He didn't show up the next day either, and I grew even more concerned. I asked my friends if any of them had his phone number so I could check on him, thinking he might be sick or in the hospital. However, they all told me that they didn't have his number because I had specifically asked them not to take it. It seemed strange in hindsight. Then, on the following day, he returned to the library, just as he always did. He walked in with his friends, said his goodbyes, and headed toward the shelves. This time, he grabbed a textbook with the code CA301 and joined us at our table. It was the first time I actually paid attention to the course material he was studying. I couldn't help but ask, "What happened to you? We didn't see you for the past 2 days." He replied with a teasing tone, "Oh, she speaks," and the table erupted in laughter. "I'm being completely serious here. You know, I didn't see you for 2 days, and I started to get worried," I mentioned as I removed my glasses. For what felt like the first time in a long semester, I looked him directly in the eyes. He gazed back at me, initially surprised, and then softened. "I'm sorry for making you worry," he said gently. "I had some family matters to attend to, but I'm back now." From that moment, our dynamic changed. We started talking more, sharing stories, and laughing together. He slowly broke down my walls, and before I knew it, we were spending almost every day together. He became my best friend, my confidant, and eventually, my boyfriend. Our relationship blossomed, and a few years later, he proposed. I was over the moon and said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was beautiful, filled with love and happiness. I thought I had it all, but then I let temptation get the best of me. I had an affair, thinking it was just a harmless fling. I never thought about the consequences until it was too late. When he found out, the look of betrayal in his eyes broke me. He asked why, and I had no good answer. I begged for forgiveness, but he chose to leave. I don't blame him. I ruined our relationship, and now I have to live with that regret every day. If I could turn back time, I would do everything differently. I would cherish him more, love him better, and never let anyone come between us. To anyone reading this, learn from my mistakes. Don't take your loved ones for granted. Communicate, work through your problems, and don't let a moment of weakness destroy what you've built. I lost the love of my life because of my selfishness. Don't let it happen to you. And then a smirk played on his lips. He was remarkably handsome, almost resembling a character from a cartoon. I couldn't help but wonder why it took me so long to notice. He had an average build, but his striking good looks more than compensated for it. His captivating blue eyes were like an endless abyss, and despite his modest height of just 5 feet 9 inches, he exuded a strong presence. His voice was deep and raspy, and I recall sometimes feeling the vibrations in my body when he spoke. It may sound silly, but it's moments like those that I miss the most right now. You worried about me? He responded after a brief pause, a hint of amusement in his voice. I would believe you, but I'm not even sure you know what my name is, he added with a playful tone. Stanley, I replied immediately, prompting laughter from my friends at the table. You see, you don't even know my name, he teased, joining in the laughter. That's a nickname I got back in junior high, and it stuck with me all the way here. Besides, it's not Stan Lee, it's Stan Lee, like the owner of Marvel Comics, he clarified. He then got up and moved to a different table, opting to sit alone. I had never seen him sit in the library before, let alone sit alone. It felt like he had heard me, and I felt guilty for not knowing his name. I couldn't help but steal glances at him, nervously biting my nails and secretly hoping he'd return to our table or at least glance back at me. He spent the next 3 hours engrossed in the books he had taken from the shelf. With exams approaching, it was understandable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the reason for his shift in attention. You know, if you miss him that much, you should go talk to him, my friend Sophia suggested. Talk to him? No way, I muttered as I put my glasses back on and returned to my own books. I already had a solid grasp of the material in the book I was studying, and I was well into my exam preparations. I continued flipping through the pages, contemplating whether I should actually approach him. Eventually, I gave in, stood up, and walked over to the table where he was sitting. Hey, I'm sorry, I said, in what he would later describe as the cutest anime-style apology ever. He looked up at me, raising an eyebrow in that way he did when he wanted someone to repeat themselves. I took a seat at the table across from him. Starting a conversation was a bit challenging, and he seemed to notice. He assured me that he wasn't upset or anything. Even though he wasn't thrilled that I didn't know his name, he explained that he had moved to a different table because he needed to focus on studying for an important test. He mentioned that the professor was strict and didn't give out good grades easily. He emphasized how crucial it was for him to pass the course and avoid an additional year in college. He also playfully added that he would have stayed at our table, but he found it more appealing to spend time looking at me rather than reading. I mustered the courage to ask, "So, what's your name then?" He closed his book, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Henry, let me introduce you to Henry," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. From that moment, everything changed. Henry and I began spending more time together, studying, laughing, and getting to know each other. He became my best friend, my confidant, and eventually my boyfriend. Our relationship blossomed, and a few years later, he proposed. I was over the moon and said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was beautiful, filled with love and happiness. I thought I had it all, but then I let temptation get the best of me. I had an affair, thinking it was just a harmless fling. I never thought about the consequences until it was too late. When he found out, the look of betrayal in his eyes broke me. He asked why, and I had no good answer. I begged for forgiveness, but he chose to leave. I don't blame him. I ruined our relationship, and now I have to live with that regret every day. If I could turn back time, I would do everything differently. I would cherish him more, love him better, and never let anyone come between us. To anyone reading this, learn from my mistakes. Don't take your loved ones for granted. Communicate, work through your problems, and don't let a moment of weakness destroy what you've built. I lost the love of my life because of my selfishness. Don't let it happen to you, who I truly am. If I had just taken a moment to appreciate what I had, things could have been so different. Now, as I sit here alone, reflecting on my past decisions, I can't help but feel a profound sense of regret. Henry had always been my rock, my confidant, and the one who made me feel safe and loved. I remember our wedding day vividly, the joy in his eyes as he saw me walk down the aisle, the way he held me close during our first dance, and the promises we made to each other. Those memories are now bittersweet reminders of what I've lost. As our marriage progressed, my desire to explore outside our relationship grew stronger. I became fixated on the idea that I was missing out on something, that there were experiences I needed to have to feel complete. In my mind, it seemed like a reasonable argument, but I failed to see how it was tearing Henry apart. When I finally gathered the courage to broach the subject again after our wedding, I did so with a sense of entitlement. I expected him to be more understanding now that we were married. Instead, his response was just as firm as before. He looked at me with a mix of hurt and disbelief and simply said, "I thought we were enough for each other. Why isn't that enough for you?" His words hit me hard, but I brushed them off, convincing myself that he would come around eventually. I started to live a double life, sneaking around and seeking out the experiences I thought I needed. I rationalized my actions, telling myself that as long as he didn't find out, it wouldn't hurt him. But secrets have a way of surfacing. One night, Henry found messages on my phone that exposed my infidelity. The look on his face when he confronted me was something I will never forget. It was a mixture of pain, anger, and betrayal. He asked me why I did it, and all I could do was stammer weak excuses. "I thought it would make our relationship stronger," I said, but even I didn't believe my own words. He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I trusted you," he said quietly. "I thought we had something real. How could you do this to us?" I begged for his forgiveness, but it was too late. He packed his things and left, and I watched the man I loved walk out of my life because of my own selfish actions. The silence in our home was deafening, and I was left alone with my guilt and regret. Now, all I have are memories of the times we shared, the laughter, the adventures, the quiet moments of comfort. I often find myself going through old photos, wishing I could turn back time and make different choices. But I can't. I can only live with the consequences of my actions and hope that one day I will find a way to forgive myself. To anyone reading this, please learn from my mistakes. Value the love you have and never take it for granted. Be honest, communicate openly, and don't let fleeting desires ruin something beautiful. I lost the love of my life because I didn't appreciate what I had. Don't let the same thing happen to you. Gave me a twisted sense of validation. It felt thrilling and new, and I let myself be swept away by it. That night, after too many drinks and a conversation that crossed all boundaries, Tom walked me home. I knew it was wrong, but I let him in. One thing led to another, and we ended up in bed together. I betrayed Henry in the worst possible way. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming, but I tried to justify it to myself. I told myself that it was what I wanted, that it would make me happier, and that Henry would eventually understand. The next morning, I woke up to the harsh reality of my actions. Tom left, and I was alone in our apartment, the remnants of my betrayal scattered around me. I tried to act normal when Henry returned home later that day, but he sensed that something was off. He asked me if everything was okay, and I lied. I lied to the man who had given me nothing but love and trust. Over the next few weeks, my behavior grew more erratic. The guilt and the thrill of my affair with Tom consumed me. I continued to see him, telling myself that I deserved this freedom. But the reality was that I was destroying the most precious thing I had in my life. Henry grew more distant as he noticed the changes in me, and I knew I was hurting him, but I couldn't stop. One evening, Henry confronted me. He had found out about Tom through a mutual friend who had seen us together. The look of heartbreak and betrayal in his eyes was more than I could bear. He didn't yell or get angry. He simply asked, "Why?" I had no answer that could justify my actions. I broke down and confessed everything. I told him about my desires, my affair, and my regrets. I begged for his forgiveness, but deep down, I knew it was too late. Henry packed his things and left that night. As I watched him walk out the door, I realized the magnitude of what I had done. I had thrown away a loving and supportive partner for a fleeting thrill. The emptiness that followed was unbearable. Tom was nothing more than a temporary distraction, and once the affair lost its allure, I was left with nothing but regret and a broken heart. In the years that followed, I tried to move on. I dated other men, but none of them came close to Henry. They didn't have his kindness, his patience, or his unwavering love. I had lost the best thing that ever happened to me, and it was entirely my fault. I often thought about reaching out to Henry to apologize and see if there was any chance of redemption, but I knew he deserved better. He deserved someone who wouldn't betray his trust. Tom eventually moved on as well. Our relationship had been based on lust and deception, and it was never meant to last. I was left alone, haunted by the memories of what I had lost. I threw myself into my work, trying to find some semblance of fulfillment, but nothing could fill the void that Henry had left. Looking back, I realized that my desire for sexual liberation was a mask for deeper insecurities and fears. I was afraid of commitment, afraid of being vulnerable, and I let those fears drive me to make the worst decision of my life. I wish I could go back and change things, but I can't. All I can do now is live with the consequences and try to be a better person. To anyone reading this, please don't make the same mistake I did. Appreciate the love you have, and don't let fleeting desires destroy something beautiful. If you're struggling with feelings of dissatisfaction, talk to your partner. Be honest and work through it together. Don't let a moment of weakness ruin a lifetime of happiness. I lost my Henry, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. For the first time ever, I felt like a teenager again. We parted ways that day after sharing a kiss. When I got home, my husband was sleeping in the living room, probably because he'd been waiting for me to return from work. I entered quietly, went to the bathroom to shower, and brush my teeth to get rid of the alcohol smell. I was still a little tipsy, but I could control it. I woke him up and told him I needed to talk to him about something. He mentioned that he had something exciting to share as well, but let me go first. He had a beautiful smile on his face as he listened attentively. However, his smile disappeared in seconds. I didn't mind because I had convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. I told him, "I just want you to know that I have to do this. I'd appreciate your support. I can't handle the fact that you're much more experienced than I am. It makes me feel like you settled for me. I don't want to be the girl you settled for. I want to be desired and admired by other men just as you were with other women before we met. I don't think I can be happy unless I do this. We're opening up the marriage, and it's not up for discussion." Those were the hurtful words I said to the man who loved me when others called me a werned, a nickname I got in college, derived from weird nerd. Those were the words I used with a man who made those nicknames disappear, the man who gave me some of the attention I always thought I deserved. These words haunt me, and I cry every time I remember that situation. What kind of foolish young lady was I? He looked into my eyes for a while, then lowered his head as if he had been defeated. He sat there in silence for what felt like an hour before saying, "Well, you've said your piece, so I guess that's that." He got up and went to the bedroom, leaving me wondering about what he had wanted to tell me earlier. He dismissed it, saying it was nothing, and blamed his tiredness on overthinking at the office. The following day, I went straight into my boss's arms. We were intimate in his office that morning, and that was just the beginning. Tom was my first intimate partner, who wasn't Henry. There were many more to follow. I often went out with my coworkers on Fridays to their regular TGIF spot and would occasionally wake up on a Saturday next to a stranger I had never met before and would never meet again. I was promiscuous, to say the least. I believed it was just a phase and that I would eventually grow out of it. But I didn't realize the price I would have to pay for my newfound enlightenment. I continued to engage with different men almost every day or every other day. 2 months later, as I was preparing for work, Tom showed up at my house. He was supposed to pick me up, assuming my husband had already left for work as usual. I thought I could seize the opportunity for a quick encounter before heading to the office together. My husband opened the door to Tom, who was holding a bouquet of flowers. Henry's face twisted in confusion and hurt. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom, taken aback, stammered, "I'm Tom. I'm here to pick up your wife." "Pick her up for what?" Henry asked, his eyes darting between us. "For work," Tom replied, glancing at me, sensing that something was terribly wrong. I could see the realization dawn on Henry. His face went pale, and he stepped aside to let Tom in. "I think we need to talk," he said to me, his voice devoid of emotion. Tom, sensing the tension, handed me the flowers awkwardly and mumbled something about waiting in the car. I stood there, clutching the bouquet, unable to look Henry in the eyes. Once Tom left, Henry closed the door and turned to me. "So this is what you wanted? To bring your affairs into our home?" His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. I tried to explain, to justify my actions, but the words felt hollow even to me. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I needed something more. More? He repeated, shaking his head. More than what? More than love? More than commitment? More than the life we were building together? I had no answer that could make sense of my betrayal. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the depth of my mistakes. I'm so sorry, Henry. I thought I needed this to be happy. And now? Are you happy? He asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of the woman he once loved. I shook my head, unable to speak. The weight of my actions crashed down on me, and I realized too late that I had destroyed the one thing that truly mattered. Henry took a deep breath, his face hardening with resolve. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I could handle it, that we could work through anything, but this is too much. He walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway, clutching the flowers that now felt like a cruel joke. I watched him pack his things, my heart breaking with every item he put into his suitcase. When he finally left, the silence was deafening. I had lost him. The man who loved me despite my flaws, who stood by me when others wouldn't, was gone because of my selfishness. The days that followed were a blur of regret and sorrow. Tom tried to comfort me, but it was no use. The damage was done. My marriage was over, and I had no one to blame but myself. I continued to see Tom for a while, hoping to find some solace in the relationship that had cost me everything. But it was empty, just like the hollow promises he had made. Eventually, I broke things off with Tom and tried to rebuild my life. But the shadow of my past hung over me, a constant reminder of what I had lost. I focused on my career, trying to fill the void with work, but nothing could replace the love and trust I had shattered. Years passed, and I watched from afar as Henry moved on. He found someone who appreciated him, someone who wouldn't betray his trust. Seeing him happy was bittersweet. I was glad he had found peace, but it was a stark reminder of what I had thrown away. If I could go back and change things, I would. But all I can do now is live with the consequences of my actions. To anyone reading this, please don't make the same mistakes I did. Cherish the love you have, and don't let fleeting desires destroy something beautiful. Learn from my story, and don't let a moment of weakness ruin a lifetime of happiness. I lost my Henry, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. I thought you were joking. I never imagined you'd actually go through with it. I tried to understand your perspective, but I just couldn't. I loved you too much to share you with anyone else. Maybe that's my flaw, but I can't change who I am. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, but it won't be with me. Take care, Henry. Reading that letter, my heart sank. I knew I had made a terrible mistake, but I didn't realize the full extent of it until that moment. I stood there, clutching the cup and letter, feeling a profound sense of loss and regret. The reality of my actions hit me harder than ever before. Henry was gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring him back. The house felt emptier than ever. His absence was palpable, a constant reminder of what I had thrown away. I wandered through the rooms, each one holding memories of our life together. The walls seemed to echo with the laughter and love we had shared, now replaced by silence and sorrow. For the next few weeks, I went through the motions of life in a daze. Work became a monotonous routine, and my encounters with Tom felt hollow. The thrill I once sought was gone, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. I avoided our usual spots, unable to face the reminders of what I had lost. Tom noticed the change in me. He tried to comfort me, but his words felt empty. I realized that he could never fill the void Henry had left. Our relationship, built on deceit and lust, was doomed from the start. One evening, I told Tom it was over. He looked relieved, perhaps knowing deep down that our connection was superficial. Alone in my apartment, I reflected on my life. The realization of my selfishness and the pain I had caused Henry weighed heavily on me. I knew I needed to make amends, not for the hope of reconciliation, but to find some semblance of peace within myself. I wrote Henry a letter, apologizing for everything. I poured my heart out, expressing my regret and acknowledging my mistakes. I didn't expect a response, but I needed to say it. I mailed it to his last known address, hoping it would reach him someday. Time passed, and I focused on rebuilding my life. I pursued hobbies, made new friends, and threw myself into work. The emptiness never fully went away, but I learned to live with it. Henry's memory remained a constant reminder of the consequences of my actions. Years later, I heard through mutual friends that Henry had found happiness in South Africa. He had met someone special and started a family. I was genuinely happy for him, knowing he deserved all the love and joy in the world. I wished him nothing but the best, hoping he had found the peace I never could. Looking back, I realized that the journey of self-discovery and redemption is a lifelong process. My mistakes had shaped me, teaching me the value of love, trust, and fidelity. I vowed never to take these for granted again. To anyone reading this, learn from my story. Cherish the love you have, and never let fleeting desires overshadow the beauty of a committed relationship. Love deeply, be faithful, and always strive to be the best partner you can be. Mistakes are inevitable, but it's how we learn and grow from them that defines us, just as I had feared. I later learned through mutual acquaintances that Henry had moved on, finding happiness with someone else in South Africa. The news hit me hard, but it also gave me a strange sense of peace. At least he was happy, even if it was without me. My life continued on a downward spiral. I drifted from one meaningless relationship to another, never finding the stability or love I once had with Henry. My career floundered, and I struggled to find a sense of purpose. My actions had not only destroyed my marriage, but also my self-esteem and sense of self-worth. Every so often, I would think back to the note and the plane ticket. I imagined what my life could have been like if I had gone with Henry to South Africa. I envisioned us working together, building a life in a new country, and starting a family. Those daydreams were bittersweet, a constant reminder of the life I had lost because of my selfishness. Over time, I sought therapy to help me cope with the overwhelming guilt and regret. My therapist encouraged me to forgive myself, but it was a long and difficult process. I slowly started to rebuild my life, focusing on small victories and trying to find happiness in the little things. I also began to reach out to the people I had hurt. I wrote heartfelt letters of apology to my parents, Elias, and even to Tom. Some responses were forgiving, while others were not. My parents, still deeply religious, struggled to reconcile with me, but we eventually found a way to maintain a distant but cordial relationship. Years passed, and I continued to work on myself. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and gradually found a sense of stability. While I never found another love like Henry, I did manage to build a circle of supportive friends who became like family to me. One day, out of the blue, I received an email from Henry. It was short and to the point, but it was the closure I had been seeking for so long. He wrote that he had forgiven me and hoped I had found peace. He mentioned that he was happily married and had 2 children. He wished me well and said that he hoped I had learned and grown from our past. Reading his words brought tears to my eyes. It was the final piece I needed to fully let go of the past. I realized that while I had made terrible mistakes, I had also learned valuable lessons. I had grown and changed, and I had found a way to live with the consequences of my actions. I will always carry the regret of losing Henry, but I have also learned to forgive myself and move forward. My life is not what I had imagined it would be, but it is still a life worth living. And while I may never have the love I once had, I have found a sense of peace and acceptance that allows me to keep going. To anyone reading this, please learn from my story. Cherish the people you love, communicate openly and honestly, and never take your relationships for granted. Mistakes can be forgiven, but some losses are irreversible. Value what you have before it's too late. Leaving. He needed to rebuild his life and couldn't do that with me around. He had found peace and happiness in South Africa, and he didn't want to jeopardize that by coming back to the painful memories we shared. I apologized profusely, expressing my deep regret for the pain I caused him. He was kind enough to forgive me, but he made it clear that we could never be together again. He had moved on, remarried, and started a family. Hearing that was heartbreaking, but it was also the closure I needed. I knew he was happy, and that was all I ever wanted for him. After our conversation, I felt a sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I realized that holding on to the past was only hurting me more. I needed to find a way to move forward with my life. I decided to make some changes. I sold the bungalow that held too many memories and moved to a new city to start fresh. I found a job as a receptionist at a small firm, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was a start. I began attending therapy sessions thanks to a local community program that offered mental health support for those in need. In therapy, I started to understand why I made the choices I did and how to avoid repeating those mistakes in the future. It was a slow and painful process, but it was necessary for my healing. I began to rebuild my self-esteem and learn to forgive myself for my past actions. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, helping others who were struggling. It gave me a sense of purpose and helped me realize that I could still make a positive impact in the world. I made new friends who liked me for who I was, not because of who I was with. While I still have moments of deep regret and sadness, I am slowly finding my way. I know I will never forget Henry or the love we shared, but I am learning to live with the choices I made and the consequences that followed. To anyone reading this, I hope my story serves as a cautionary tale. Cherish the people you love, communicate openly, and never take your relationships for granted. Learn from my mistakes, and don't let a moment of selfishness ruin something beautiful. There is always hope for redemption, but it starts with acknowledging your faults and making a genuine effort to change. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. I wish you all the best in your own journeys.